If I had known that night would be the last time I ever felt safe in my own home, I would have memorized it differently. The light over the dining table glowed the way it always did, soft, golden, forgiving. It smoothed over the cracks in the paint, and the scratches in the wood made everything look warmer than it really was. I had installed that light fixture myself 12 years ago, back when this house still felt like something we were building together instead of something I was maintaining alone. The table beneath it was solid oak, scarred by years of holiday dinners, late-night homework sessions, and arguments we pretended never happened. It was supposed to be an ordinary Sunday dinner, the kind where the roast sits in the center of the table like a peace offering, where glasses clink, where we talk about work, about traffic, about nothing that matters. Routine is a powerful thing. It makes you believe tomorrow will look like yesterday. It convinces you that stability is permanent. She arrived 20 minutes late. That in itself wasn't unusual. She had been late to things lately, dinners, birthdays, conversations. Lately had stretched into months, but I told myself it was work, or stress, or anything that didn't require me to question loyalty. When she walked in, she didn't apologize. She just smiled too brightly, too tightly, and set her purse on the counter. "I hope we didn't miss anything," she said. "Wait." The word slipped past me at first. I was carrying the platter from the kitchen, focused on not spilling the gravy. I registered the plural without examining it. It wasn't until I looked up that I saw him step in behind her. He shouldn't have looked natural in that doorway, but he did. He had been in this house before, dozens of times. He knew where the glasses were kept. He knew which chair didn't wobble. He knew that the back door stuck in humid weather. He had been family. Or so I thought. He nodded at me like nothing had changed, like he hadn't crossed a line that I didn't yet know existed. We sat down, the chairs scraped softly against the floor. The ritual began. Pass the bread. Compliment the potatoes, ask about the week. For years, this house had been my anchor. After my husband died, it became more than walls and a roof. It was the last place where his laugh still echoed. The last place where I felt like something hadn't been ripped away from me. I held onto it the way people hold onto heirlooms, carefully, protectively, obsessively. I paid the mortgage. I handled the repairs. I kept the taxes current. I told myself that sacrifice was the same thing as love. Across the table, she laughed at something he said. Her hand brushed his. It lingered. I noticed that. I told myself not to. There had always been an ease between them. He had been around since childhood, practically raised alongside her. I had opened my home to him when his own family fell apart. I had given him a key once, trusted him with holidays, trusted him with us. Trust is quiet. It builds slowly, invisibly. You don't notice it until it breaks. Dinner moved along in familiar rhythms. The roast was tender. The wine was good. The conversation skimmed the surface of safe topics, but there was an undercurrent I couldn't name, a current pulling beneath the calm. She kept glancing at him, like they were sharing a private joke. I should have felt included. Instead, I felt observed. Halfway through the meal, she set her fork down. The sound was soft, but it cut through the room. "I have something to share," she said. My first instinct was joy, pregnancy, promotion, something celebratory. That's what announcements are supposed to be. That's what dinner tables are for. She reached for his hand fully this time. "We didn't want to make a big fuss," she continued, smiling in a way that didn't reach her eyes. "But we thought it was time you knew." "Knew what?" My chest tightened, not with fear, not yet, with confusion. "We got married," she said. Just like that. 3 words that detonated quietly. For a second, no one moved. The air seemed to thicken, as if the room itself was trying to process what had just been said. Married. My eyes moved from her face to his, searching for a sign that this was a joke, a misunderstanding, a rehearsal for something else. But his grip on her hand tightened. "It was small," he added. "Private." Private. As in, not here. Not with me. Not with the person who had paid for half the college tuition, who had kept the lights on, who had offered him a room when he had nowhere to go. Private meant intentional. I heard myself speak, but my voice sounded distant. When? A few weeks ago. Weeks. Weeks of dinners. Weeks of phone calls. Weeks of sitting in this very room while they looked at me and said nothing. I tried to reconstruct the timeline in my head. Holidays, birthdays, the day the water heater broke and he helped fix it. Had they already been married then? Had I been thanking my new son-in-law without knowing it? The room tilted slightly. Not enough to knock me over, just enough to remind me that balance is fragile. I forced a smile. It felt like stretching cracked porcelain over a fracture. Well, I said carefully, congratulations. The word tasted like ash. She exhaled, relieved, as if my response had been a test. And then, before I could gather myself, before I could even begin to process the betrayal of secrecy, she reached into her purse. There's one more thing, she said. The phrase landed, heavier than the first announcement. He avoided my eyes. She pulled out an envelope, thick, official. My name was printed on the front. I remember thinking it was strange she hadn't handed it to me before dinner, or after. But no, she chose the middle, the moment of maximum vulnerability. I took it automatically. My fingers felt numb. What is this? I asked. Just paperwork, she replied, too casually. Paperwork doesn't require witnesses. Paperwork doesn't need an audience. I slid a finger under the flap and opened it. The words blurred at first. Legal language has a way of disguising its cruelty. It hides knives in formal phrasing. Notice to vacate. 30 days. Property transfer. Lawful spouse. My heartbeat roared in my ears. I read it again, slower this time. The house I had poured 12 years into, was no longer solely mine. A transfer had been executed, legal mechanisms triggered by marriage, clauses I barely remembered signing when refinancing years ago. He had known. He had known what marrying her would activate. The document stated, in calm, merciless language, that I was required to vacate the property within 30 days. I looked up. She was watching me, not with remorse, but with anticipation. Security versus displacement. Trust versus humiliation. Family versus strategy. You can't be serious, I said. She shifted in her seat. It's not personal. Not personal. Eviction is deeply personal. He finally spoke. It's just the next step. We want to start our life here. Here. In my home. The walls seemed to close in. Every photo on them felt suddenly fragile. Every memory temporary. I've lived here for over a decade, I said, my voice trembling now despite my efforts. Your father died here. She flinched, but only slightly. We're not saying you have nowhere to go, she replied. You'll figure something out. You'll figure something out. As if I were an inconvenience, a scheduling conflict. I felt heat rise behind my eyes, not tears, fury. All the late nights, all the sacrifices, all the decisions made to protect her future, and she had secured hers by dismantling mine. How long have you been planning this? I asked. Silence. Silence is an answer. The roast sat untouched between us, steam no longer rising, warmth fading. He cleared his throat. We didn't want drama, so they chose ambush instead. The brilliance of it struck me even through the shock. Announce the marriage first, create emotional momentum, then deliver the notice while I was still reeling. Control the narrative, frame it as progress, not betrayal. It wasn't impulsive. It was calculated. I stood up slowly. My chair scraped loudly this time. No one tried to stop me. You should have told me, I said quietly. She looked defensive now. We knew you, overreact. Overreact. To losing my home. To discovering the two people I trusted most had orchestrated my displacement behind my back. The contrast was suffocating. For years, I had believed loyalty was our foundation. That blood meant something. That shared grief bonded us. But loyalty had been replaced by leverage. He stood as well, perhaps thinking it would soften the blow. It didn't. "We'll help you pack," he offered. The audacity of it almost made me laugh. Help me pack. I looked around the room. The table, the light fixture, the faint crack in the ceiling I kept meaning to repair. Every detail felt like it was already slipping away. "This was your home too," I said to her. "How could you do this?" Her expression hardened. "Because it's time." Time. Time for what? For me to disappear quietly so they could renovate my memories into their future. The humiliation settled in slowly. Not just that I was being forced out, but that it had been arranged without my knowledge. That legal documents had been drafted while I was cooking dinners and folding laundry. I sat back down, suddenly exhausted. The envelope lay open in front of me like evidence. 30 days. 30 days to dismantle a life. They began talking logistics, timelines, minor renovations they planned, ideas for the spare bedroom, as if I were already gone. I stopped listening. Instead, I watched them. The ease between them, the unity, the shared glances, it wasn't spontaneous. It was rehearsed. They had likely practiced this conversation, anticipated my reactions, prepared responses. What they hadn't prepared for was my silence. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I didn't beg. I simply folded the notice carefully and placed it back in the envelope. "I see," I said. And I did. I saw every missed sign, every whispered phone call, every sudden financial question, every moment they had studied me instead of spoken to me. Security had been an illusion. This house wasn't being taken from me in a single night. It had been slipping away for months. Dinner ended without dessert. They left together. I stayed at the table, long after the door closed. The clock ticked loudly in the kitchen. Each second felt accusatory. How had I not seen it? How had I mistaken proximity for loyalty? The house felt different now. Not warm, not safe. Temporary. I walked through each room slowly. The living room where she took her first steps. The hallway where he once slept on an air mattress when he had nowhere else to go. The bedroom where I grieved alone after the funeral. Every space held history. And now, apparently, expiration. I stopped in the doorway of the dining room and looked back at the table. The plates were still there, half-eaten food. A wine glass tipped slightly, leaving a red stain like something wounded. This was how it happened. Not with shouting. Not with warning. But with a smile, a marriage announcement, and a moving notice slipped across the table like a final course. I stood there, the envelope clutched in my hand, understanding something with cold clarity. This wasn't sudden. It was strategic. And as the silence settled heavy around me, I began replaying every moment leading up to that night, searching desperately for the first crack in the foundation I thought would never break. Shock fades, silence doesn't. The morning after the dinner, I woke up in the same bed I had slept in for over a decade, but it no longer felt like mine. The walls hadn't moved. The ceiling hadn't cracked, yet something fundamental had shifted. Security had evaporated overnight, replaced by a quiet, suffocating uncertainty. 30 days. The number pulsed in my mind, like a countdown clock. At first, I moved through the house in a fog. I made coffee. I opened curtains. I followed routine because routine was the only thing that still obeyed me. But as the hours passed, the fog thinned and clarity began to sting. Clarity has teeth. I sat at the dining table, the same table where the envelope had slid toward me, and began replaying the past year like surveillance footage. When had it started? Not the marriage, the strategy. Because now I was certain there had been one. The first sign had been small, so small I dismissed it as adulthood. She had started taking more calls outside. "It's just work," she'd say, stepping onto the back porch. I hadn't questioned it. Privacy is normal. Independence is healthy. But privacy and secrecy are not the same thing. Then there were the dinners she skipped, the weekends she spent at a friend. The holidays she shortened because she was tired. Each absence seemed reasonable on its own. Together, they formed a pattern. And he had been around just enough to stay trusted. He helped with repairs. He fixed the fence last spring. He offered to review refinancing paperwork when interest rates dropped. "Just looking out for you," he'd said, leaning over the kitchen counter with a reassuring smile. Looking back, I remember how carefully he asked certain questions. Is the house fully in your name now? What happens to it long term? Did you ever update the deed after the refinance? At the time, I heard concern. Now I hear reconnaissance. I pushed back from the table and went to the filing cabinet in the hallway closet. The metal drawer stuck the way it always had. I yanked it open and began pulling out folders. Mortgage documents, insurance policies, property tax receipts. I had always prided myself on being organized, on being responsible. After my husband died, paperwork became my shield. If I couldn't control grief, I could control documentation. Control versus vulnerability. Yet somewhere in those stacks of paper, I had lost leverage without realizing it. I found the refinance agreement from 3 years ago, the one he had helped me review. I remembered sitting at this very table, exhausted from juggling bills and repairs, grateful that someone was willing to explain the fine print. I flipped through the pages slowly now. There it was. A clause regarding survivorship and marital transfer, rights under specific conditions. Language that had seemed irrelevant to me at the time. Language that only activated under marriage. Marriage to a direct heir. My stomach tightened. Had he known even then? Had they discussed it before I ever suspected anything? I thought back to the summer barbecue 2 years ago, the way they stood too close near the grill, the way conversation stopped when I walked outside. I had told myself I was imagining tension because I was lonely. Lonely people doubt themselves before they doubt others. I sat back down, documents spread around me like puzzle pieces. What I once believed was coincidence now felt choreographed. She had started asking subtle questions about inheritance around that time, too. If something happened to you, what would you want done with the house? I just want to be prepared, she had insisted. Prepared. The word sounded so innocent then. Now it sounded like positioning. I pressed my palms against the table and closed my eyes. My mind drifted further back, years of loyalty, or what I had believed was loyalty. When her father died, she was inconsolable. I held her through nights when she couldn't sleep. I paid for counseling. I worked overtime to cover tuition so she wouldn't graduate with debt. When he, now her husband, lost his own family support, I opened my door without hesitation. He ate at this table. He celebrated holidays here. I defended him when others questioned his ambition. I treated him like a son. And sons don't usually calculate their mother's displacement. Greed versus integrity. Which side had I been standing on all along? My phone buzzed on the counter. A message from my sister. I heard what happened. Call me. News travels fast when it smells like scandal. I called her. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. Is it true? Yes. A pause, then I always thought something was off. The words struck harder than I expected. Why didn't you say anything? You wouldn't have listened, she replied gently. You trusted them. Trust, again that word. Did you know about the legal angle? She asked. I'm starting to. She sighed. You need a lawyer. The idea felt dramatic, but then again, so did eviction from your own home. I don't have the money for a drawn-out fight, I admitted. You don't have the money not to fight, she countered. The line stayed with me long after we hung up. I spent the afternoon combing through bank statements. That's when I noticed another shift I had ignored. Over the past 6 months, she had stopped contributing to shared expenses entirely. Small at first, utilities, groceries when she was still living here part-time. Then nothing. I had assumed she was saving, planning her future. She was. Just not with me in it. I also noticed something else. There had been a transfer, large, quiet, into a joint account I didn't recognize, dated shortly before the refinance. I stared at the numbers until they blurred. Money changes behavior. It reveals priorities. Had they needed capital to secure the marriage license? Legal fees? Was this about love or leverage? I thought about their faces at dinner, calm, prepared, united. They hadn't looked guilty. They had looked confident. Confidence suggests certainty. Certainty suggests planning. The realization hardened something inside me. This wasn't impulsive betrayal. It was incremental. Each private call, each absence, each financial adjustment, each carefully phrased question about ownership. I had mistaken distance for adulthood. It was strategy. That evening, I called her. She answered on the second ring. "Hi," she said cautiously. "How long?" I asked. Silence. "How long have you been planning this?" "You're being dramatic." "Am I?" Another pause, then, "We didn't plan it the way you think." "Then explain it the way I should." She exhaled sharply. "It just made sense." "Made sense." "For who?" I pressed. "For us," she said. "This house has value. We can build something here." "You mean you can build something here?" "That's not fair." "Neither is 30 days' notice." Her tone shifted, defensive, irritated. "You always act like everything is yours." Everything was mine. I had paid for it. But that wasn't what she meant. She meant control. Had my responsibility felt like dominance to her? Had my stability felt like a cage? Weakness versus strength. To me, providing had been strength. To her, maybe it had been authority. "I would have helped you," I said quietly. "If you wanted to build something, we could have talked." "You wouldn't have agreed," she replied instantly. The certainty in her voice startled me. "You didn't even give me the chance." "Because you never let go," she said. "You hold on to everything." Maybe I did. I held onto memories, onto routine, onto the idea that family protects rather than replaces. But holding on is not the same as suffocating. "We'll give you extra time if you need it," she added, as if offering mercy. I almost laughed. Mercy from the people dismantling my life. "No," I said slowly. "I don't want extra time." "What does that mean?" "It means I'm looking into my options." Her silence this time wasn't defensive. It was wary. After the call, I felt something shift inside me. Confusion was giving way to anger. Anger is clarifying. I scheduled a consultation with a property attorney the next morning. The office smelled like polished wood and old paper. The attorney, a woman in her late 50s with sharp eyes and sharper questions, listened without interrupting. When I finished, she tapped the moving notice thoughtfully. "They're relying on a clause triggered by marriage," she said. "But that doesn't automatically override your occupancy rights." Hope flickered. "They can't just evict you without due process," she continued, "especially given your financial contributions and length of residency." "So this isn't airtight?" I asked. Nothing is airtight when challenged correctly. Control versus vulnerability. For the first time since dinner, I felt less vulnerable. "But be prepared," she added. "This could get messy. Family cases often do." Family cases. The phrase sounded clinical, detached, as if this were just another dispute. To me, it was a fracture in identity. Who am I if I'm not the protector of this home? Who am I if the people I raised can strategize against me? I left the office with a folder of notes and a new awareness. They had assumed I wouldn't push back. They had assumed shock would paralyze me. They had assumed loyalty would silence me. That assumption might be their mistake. Over the next week, lines were drawn quietly. My sister stood firmly with me. An aunt sent a message suggesting I let the young people have their start. Friends called with sympathy, but avoided taking sides. He texted once, "Let's handle this like adults." as if adulthood belonged solely to those who execute legal maneuvers. I began documenting everything: dates, conversations, financial transfers, emails. Each fact chipped away at the narrative they had constructed. They wanted this to look like progress. I wanted it to look like what it was: displacement. I stood in the living room one evening, looking at the photographs on the wall. My husband holding a newborn, birthday candles, graduation caps. Inheritance isn't just money. It's memory. It's legacy. And legacy isn't something you ambush at dinner. The more I examined the timeline, the clearer the pattern became. The marriage license had been filed just days after the refinance clause review. The bank transfer coincided with consultation fees for a real estate advisor I later discovered he had met with. This wasn't romance. It was positioning. Greed doesn't always shout. Sometimes it smiles across the table and passes the salt. The fear of homelessness still lingered at night. 30 days loomed, but fear was no longer dominant. Determination was. I had spent years protecting this house for her future. Now I would protect it from her strategy. As evidence mounted and illusions fell away, one truth crystallized. I had been naive, but I was not powerless. And as options narrowed and timelines tightened, I reached a decision that felt both terrifying and necessary. I would not leave quietly. I would not shrink to accommodate their plan. I would fight. Because sometimes the difference between victim and survivor is a single choice. And I was done being the easy one to displace. I didn't sleep the night I decided to fight. Not because I was afraid anymore, but because something inside me had finally steadied. Fear is chaotic, determination is precise. And for the first time since that dinner, I felt precise. 30 days had been their weapon. Time would become mine. The attorney moved quickly. A formal response to the notice was filed within the week, challenging the validity of their claim to immediate possession. My financial contributions, my occupancy history, and the circumstances surrounding the refinance were all documented in sharp, undeniable detail. Paper against paper. Strategy against strategy. I watched their confidence falter the moment they received the first legal correspondence. She called me within hours. "What is this?" she demanded. "This," I replied calmly, "is due process." "You're escalating this." "No," I said, "I'm responding." Silence on the other end of the line felt different this time. Not superior, not rehearsed. Uncertain. Desperation versus strategy. They had expected desperation. Instead, they got documentation. A few days later, we met on neutral ground at the attorney's office. I insisted. No more ambushes at my own table. No more staged announcements under warm lighting. The conference room was sterile. White walls, glass table, no nostalgia to soften anything. They sat together, hands clasped the way they had been at dinner. But the unity felt thinner now, strained by the unfamiliar weight of accountability. My attorney began outlining the legal complications in measured, unemotional tones. "While marriage may trigger certain survivorship provisions," she explained, "it does not invalidate established equitable interest, nor does it grant unilateral eviction authority." Their lawyer frowned. He shuffled papers. "That clause," my attorney continued, tapping the refinance agreement, "requires full disclosure of intent at signing. We have reason to believe that disclosure was incomplete." The air shifted. He looked at her. She looked at him. Greed versus integrity. Integrity survives scrutiny. Greed rarely does. "You're implying misconduct," their lawyer asked. "I'm stating possibility," my attorney replied evenly. "And possibility is sufficient to pause any transfer of possession." Pause. A small word, a powerful one. 30 days had been a ticking clock. Now the clock had stopped. After the meeting, she cornered me in the hallway. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice no longer sharp, just strained. Because you didn't give me a choice. We just wanted to start our life. At the cost of mine. Her jaw tightened. You always make everything about sacrifice. I sacrificed because I loved you, I said. Not because I expected repayment, but I didn't expect replacement either. Replacement. That word landed heavier than anything else. For a flicker of a second, I saw something in her expression, doubt maybe, or realization. But he stepped beside her, protective. We're not backing down, he said. I'm not asking you to, I replied. I'm asking you to do it honestly. That was the line. Honesty. If they had come to me and said they wanted to build their future here, we could have negotiated. We could have drawn up agreements, shared equity, timelines. Instead, they chose secrecy. Secrecy is efficient, but it leaves fingerprints. Over the next month, evidence surfaced slowly. The refinance meeting notes revealed something crucial. He had attended as family advisor, not merely as moral support. Questions he asked were recorded in margin annotations by the loan officer. Specific questions about survivorship rights triggered by direct line marriage. That wasn't curiosity. That was foresight. The attorney's eyes sharpened when she read the notes. This suggests premeditation, she said. Premeditation. A legal word. A personal wound. When confronted with this documentation, their lawyer shifted tone entirely. Settlement was suggested. Settlement. In other words, negotiation. Control versus vulnerability. The power dynamic had shifted quietly, but unmistakably. They no longer dictated terms. We began negotiating under entirely different conditions. My occupancy rights would be formally recognized. Any future transfer would require my written consent. Financial contributions toward the mortgage from them would be mandatory if they wished to claim partial equity. No more invisible positioning. Everything on paper. She met me one evening alone. Not at the house. At a cafe halfway across town. I didn't think it would go this far, she admitted. You thought I would leave quietly. I thought you'd understand. I would have, I said gently, if you'd trusted me. She stared at her coffee. I was tired of feeling like I lived in your shadow. The confession surprised me. My shadow, I repeated. You control everything. The house, the money, the decisions. I controlled what I paid for, I said, because no one else was. She swallowed. It felt like I'd never truly own anything as long as you were there. And there it was. Not just greed. Insecurity. Weakness disguised as ambition. You thought taking it would make it yours, I asked softly. I thought marriage would make it ours. But you skipped the part where you asked. Tears welled in her eyes then, not dramatic, not theatrical, just human. I didn't want you to say no. So you made sure I couldn't. Silence again. But this silence was different. It wasn't strategic. It was reflective. The settlement agreement finalized 2 weeks later. The house would remain in my name entirely. Any claim to equity would require documented financial contribution over time. I would retain full residency rights without deadline. In exchange, I agreed not to pursue further legal action regarding potential non-disclosure. It wasn't revenge. It was recalibration. When they signed, I watched their expressions carefully. He looked frustrated, calculating still but constrained. She looked smaller. Not defeated. Just confronted. Betrayal versus self-respect. I chose self-respect. The dinner table remained where it had always been. The light still glowed warmly at night, but the illusion of unconditional safety was gone. And strangely, that made the house feel more honest. We attempted a few joint dinners after that. They were polite. Measured. The laughter never reached the ceiling the way it once had. Something permanent had fractured. Trust doesn't reset simply because paperwork is amended. Months passed. They moved into an apartment nearby instead of the house. Their start looked different than planned. Smaller, less triumphant. I watched from a distance. Sometimes I felt sorrow. Sometimes I felt relief. Home had changed shape for all of us. One evening, nearly a year after the original dinner, she came by alone. The house smelled like rain through open windows. "I've been thinking," she said quietly, standing in the living room. "So have I. I thought if I secured the house, I'd feel stable," she admitted, "but I just felt guilty. Guilt is a late teacher." "I didn't raise you to feel entitled," I said. "I raised you to feel capable." She nodded slowly. "I was afraid of building something on my own." Fear again. The same fear that once lived in me after her father died. The same fear that drove me to clutch this house like armor. We are not as different as we think. But similarity doesn't excuse betrayal. "I can forgive," I said carefully, "but I can't pretend it didn't happen." "I know." And for the first time, I believed she did. The house remained mine. Not because I clung to it, but because I defended it. And in defending it, I rediscovered something far more important. Strength isn't loud. It doesn't slam doors or deliver speeches. It files responses. It gathers evidence. It sits calmly across a conference table and refuses to shrink. I used to think home was this structure: wood, nails, memories pressed into walls. But home is also boundaries. It's the refusal to be erased. It's the decision to speak when silence would be easier. The night of the dinner, I had felt displaced before I ever packed a box. Now, standing in the same dining room, I felt grounded. Not because I won, but because I stood. There was no poetic revenge. No dramatic apology that restored everything. Just clarity. Betrayal revealed who they were. It also revealed who I was. Not a victim of surprise. Not a woman easily cornered. But someone capable of shifting from shock to strategy. From confusion to conviction. The warm light above the table still flickers slightly when the voltage dips. I never fix that. It reminds me that stability isn't perfection. It's resilience. That dinner changed everything. But it did not end me. And as I sit at this table now, alone but not lonely, I understand something I didn't before. Home was never something they could hand me a notice for. It was something I carried all along.